Welcome to our conference panel, Voices of Culture, a discussion on Seattle area oral history programs. My name is Alison DeRiemer. I'm the Archivist and Oral History Specialist here at the National Nordic Museum in the Ballard neighborhood of Seattle. And today I'm here with two other oral historians representing two wonderful cultural organizations here in the Seattle area. So I'd like to welcome both of you. Thank you so much for being here today for our first virtual Nordic Genealogy Conference. So we have Lisa Cranzler, and she's the Executive Director of the Washington State Jewish Historical Society over on Mercer Island. And we also have Mikala Woodward with us, and she is the Exhibit Developer and Oral History Manager at the Wing Luke Museum of the Asian Pacific American Experience here in Seattle in the Chinatown International District. And I will be moderating the discussion today about these oral history programs, including what it's been like to manage, to share these stories for both present and future audiences. And so with that, I'd just like to ask both of our panelists to please briefly introduce yourselves and your organizations. And then we'll just go ahead and get deeper into the specific questions about your programs. So Lisa, would you like to start?
Sure, and thank you, Allison, for asking us here today.
Sure.
I really appreciate it. And I'm Lisa Cranzler, and as Allison mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of the Washington State Jewish Historical Society. We are a 52-year-old organization, and the oral history program is very important to us, and our collaboration with the Washington State Jewish Archives at the University of Washington Special Collections libraries. And our organization is here to collect, preserve, and disseminate the history of the Jewish people of Washington State.
Great, thank you. And Mikala?
Hi, yeah, so thanks for this opportunity for both of us to talk about our work. It's really exciting to share it. So I'm an exhibit developer at the Wing Luke Museum and also run the oral history program. And our museum shares stories of the art, history, and culture of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the US.
Great, thank you. So Lisa, could you tell us a little bit about how the oral history program got started at the Washington State Jewish Historical Society?
Sure. So over 50 years ago, the University of Washington came together with the offshoot of the women's group of the Jewish Federation of Washington, and we were forming, starting doing oral histories, and it turned out that the university had also a plan to ask 4 ethnic groups to come together to feature their collections at the university special collections libraries. So we were one of those 4 groups that were asked, and we had a group of founders, and they started basically doing oral histories in the early 70s, and with a recorder and with their will and their might and their perseverance, we now have almost 500 in our collection.
Wow. And Mikala, could you tell us how interviewees are identified for your program at the Wing Luke?
Yeah, so most of our oral histories are conducted as part of our exhibit process. So we have a community-based exhibit development process where instead of having curators, we gather together a group of people with a connection to the topic, and those people identify the exhibit's themes and messages and content. And so that's kind of where we start. And often we'll conduct oral history interviews as part of gathering content for an exhibit. So those are very focused on a particular topic. It's not a big life history. We try to get a little bit of biographical information from people at the beginning, but then we're asking them about their athletic career or their beer brewing business or whatever it is that the exhibit is about. So that's the bulk of the oral histories in our collection tend to be around that. We have conducted some more in-depth oral history projects in particular communities. but mostly the ones we collect these days are focused on exhibits. We also do, the other thing that I do a lot of is we partner with community organizations that want to do an oral history project in their communities, and often it's training youth to interview their elders and produce some sort of exhibit or production of some kind of theater production or publication or something. And so in those cases, we're often approached by someone, an organization that wants to do that. And so in that case, that community is recruiting the interviewees from their own place. And then, occasionally we have an oral history lab at the museum, and anybody can come and use it. So people often will come and interview their grandma or, someone that they think would be good to record. And we ask for a copy of those interviews to be put into our archives as part of that process. So those are the ways that we pick people.
Great. And Lisa, what about for you? How are you identifying people to interview?
Yeah, so in some respects it's similar now, but in the past we've had an archives committee that basically were made up of the founders, and they more than likely they chose a lot of the people in the community that had some specific focus on either founding an organization, Jewish organization, or founders of the synagogues, or prominent, business people or community members in some aspect. So there was a lot of biographical information in the former oral histories that were done. They also had a lot of biographical information because there was a lot of immigration to Washington in terms of coming here, before the Holocaust. The ancestors who came, like a lot of people were interviewed with their parents who had come in the early 1900s, different waves of Jewish immigration. So biographical information at that point in time was very important to gather where they were from, different parts of Europe. And also we had a great collection of Sephardic Jews from the Mediterranean. So very much in the past was based on those methods and biographical and chronological, but we have moved to, and I can tell you about this a little bit later in some of your later questions, but we've moved to a new approach for our oral histories, and it's very similar to what Mikala is saying about exhibit-based and topical-based.
Okay, that's great. And kind of along the same lines, since this is a genealogy conference, kind of just touching on the topic of genealogy, Lisa, we'll start with you, but do you get family members or researchers asking to view some of the oral histories for genealogical purposes or family research purposes?
So we do get that. There are a lot of researchers. There's a Jewish studies program at the university, and there's a lot of research that is done with our collection. We have a part-time archivist, Ryan Donaldson. He's an archivist and content strategy manager, and he works usually at the U, but now at home. The research is done because there's a lot of similar names in at least in the Sephardic tradition. There's people that came from Rhodes and from Turkey. They tend to name their babies after the living. So there's a lot of the same names, and it's very important to see like which owl, X person it is, and which and where did they come from, and it gives a lot of the family history that way. So it helps with knowing who you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. And what about at the Open Luke? Same question.
Yeah, so I think genealogy is not a huge focus for us, but we do have people who come and want to find out more about their family history. And for people who are kind of deeply embedded in the Asian American community in Seattle, in particular the Chinese American community, we have collected a number of oral histories, and they may well find something there about their relative. But I would not say we're super well set up for that. We're working more on, all of our interviews are cataloged and indexed so people can search by name and topic and find what we have about particular people. And we're working on providing better online access to that material. It's not always easy to find things in our collection without coming to the space, which is even harder now.
Yeah. And Mikala, what are some challenges that your organization faces with regards to family research, genealogy, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I was thinking about this when you were asking, when you sent out the list of questions, and I think, with many marginalized communities in the U.S., racism and discrimination, kind of both structural, institutional policy, but also internalized, pressure to assimilate or whatever, has really made it harder in some cases for people to research their family history. Just a couple examples, particular things. As you know, Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882 kind of, banned people coming from China unless they were in certain very particular categories. And then in 1906, the earthquake in San Francisco and the fire following that destroyed a whole bunch of immigration and birth records. And so there was this weird window of opportunity created for Chinese people to, coming in to say oh yeah, I was born here, or, and you just lost the records. And so there's this whole tradition of, with the paper son phenomenon, which you may have heard of people kind of pretending to be someone else in order to get into the country, and memorizing all of these family details, then being coached. And then so they produced this tremendous trove of documentation, which you can find at the National Archives. There's great transcripts of these interviews and photographs of everybody coming in and everything, but it may or may not be true. So you have this kind of odd, it's very interesting for Chinese Americans to try to research their family history. And then, another example of the Japanese American community, when there's tremendous anti-Japanese sentiment during World War II and leading up to it, people were destroying all of their family photos and their heirlooms in order to not have any evidence of connection to Japan. And so that's a huge loss of all kinds of material that would have been very wonderful for people to have now if they were researching their family histories. And I think language loss, language barriers are huge for a lot of communities, and many immigrant community, not just people coming from Asian countries, but that has made it very, even these projects we do where we have young people interviewing their elders, there's often already it's hard for them to understand what their elders are sharing, and that's something that is difficult for people when they're trying to recover some kind of stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, and then I also wanted to say, which I think this is probably true for some of your folks too, Lisa, just, when you're coming from a country that's in war and chaos, you don't always have all your records, and the records don't always get preserved. And, refugee families, it's just, many lines get severed that you might be able to follow if that hadn't happened. And I was talking to one of my Filipino colleagues, and she was we were talking about, she's been doing genealogy, and somehow if you're from the Philippines, there's it's this Catholic country, there's all these churches, with all these records, and just like if you were French or something, you might be able to find records of who was born and died and married and all of that, but somehow the ones in the Philippines haven't been put online. Or haven't been digitized and made accessible as much as some of the ones from European countries. And I was wondering about that with, China has been keeping incredibly great records for hundreds of years. Is any of that available for people looking? I don't actually know the answer to that question, but I think there may be a gap in what is made available online for people.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Lisa, do you have anything you'd like to add to that topic?
I think, the only thing I'd like to add is obviously from in the Jewish world, the Holocaust was a big obstacle. And, a lot of people were fleeing and coming here, and the records of their family and, the people and the stories of their family. I mean, they tried to keep it alive as much as possible. And we have a wonderful Holocaust Center for Humanity here as well that has a lot of the survivors' stories that are recorded. So we have some overlap with them as well. But that would be the big obstacle. And for now, the survivors are dying out. And so their stories are being lost. So there's a tremendous push to have, gotten some of that material before it's too late. And we're getting into the next generation of the children of the survivors in that sense to make sure that those stories are captured.
Yeah. I wonder, I think this is probably another area where there might be some overlap between us, but or our institutions, that sometimes those super traumatic stories are really hard for people to talk about, and so you do just lose them, and that's there was a project one of my friends did in the Cambodian community where there were all of these middle school kids who were having trouble in school, and they were acting out, and their school counselors kind of were able to tease out that these kids were trying to find their identity, and they had this giant gaping dark hole where all these family stories would be because their parents were so traumatized and just had not been sharing these stories, and that he developed a project where people were able to do art and storytelling in this intergenerational setting, and that was really the first time some of these older people were able to share some of those stories, and that was a really powerful gift to the younger people to kind of finally hear some of these things. And I think that's a piece that we try to achieve at the museum, of providing that space and that opportunity for those kinds of things to happen, and for those stories to be shared.
Yeah, wow, that's great. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how you share your oral histories with the public. And Lisa, would you like to start just kind of talking about how, your stories are shared with your core audience, and then also just the general public?
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. So in late 2018 and really in 2019, we launched the Washington Jewish Museum, which is a digital museum. And we called it the place to unlock the voices, curate, exhibits on the voices. So basically, the voices exist in the special collections libraries and in the Washington Jewish Archives at the university, and that's the repository. But there's hours of materials in there, and researchers and family members might look at them, but in general, I felt that we needed a vehicle to bring out these voices. So the launch of the digital museum, where we were able to do the curation, and we've gone out to some of the families. I mean, we have endless amount of work to do, but we've gone out to the families, and we've curated their voices, the clips, and put them together with their photos, other media and materials, and their stories. And so this can be done endlessly because the individuals in our collections talk about every aspect of not only of creating and founding Jewish Washington and Jewish organizations and synagogues, but also many of our institutions that are here, like Ben Arroyo Hall and the voice of Jack Ben Arroyo, or Costco and the voice of Jeff Brotman, may they rest in peace, and the Supersonic, many sports teams. We have voices from those collections. So it's been really fun to hear those voices and to have the ability to bring them and to curate them. So the digital museum is our main vehicle, but we've been getting into many new things we're having a segment on King 5 News next week on this subject, on unlocking the voices. And that's in preparation for our September 13th fundraising event, where we are basically unlocking the voices. So this has become very, popular to hear these past voices. And later I'll talk a little bit about how we've evolved so that we're going to be collecting new voices. But one other thing I wanted to mention is, and this is fun, is that we've been putting out a voice of the week. So kind of a guessing thing. And, you know, it's fun to see sometimes even the kids of the voice don't even, you know, haven't even heard those stories. Or, you know, they've known something, but it really brings a lot of community interest and engagement. So I'm excited about, you know, the approach that we're taking to make it public.
That's great. That's something that we hear a lot too when we interview people for our Nordic American Voices program. Their children say a lot, I've never heard this story before. Why did you never tell me this? And it's, you know, they didn't feel like they had an opportunity before maybe. So that's one of the great things about these programs. And Mikala, how about at the Wing Luke? How are you sharing your stories with the public?
Well, the main thing that I do is exhibits. So that's, we always incorporate first-person stories into our exhibits in various ways. It's one of the ways that we try to make our exhibits more intimate and immediate, and also to sort of show that there's multiple perspectives on any given story without the museum kind of taking a position, that we can have different people share their first person experiences. So we try to do that with quotes, you know, pulled out in text form and audio and video sometimes. And, you know, we try to create the environment of the exhibit in such a way that it will allow the visitor to kind of enter into those stories kind of in a visceral way. So that's the main thing that I work on, but, you know, we also do publications sometimes. We have a podcast that's in the works, so we're trying to incorporate some of the oral histories into that. And then whenever we do one of those projects that's in collaboration with a community group, we work with them to figure out, do they want to make a pop-up exhibit? Do they want to do an event of some kind? You know, how do they want to share this stuff? And then we are, like I said, working on more online access to our stories. And, you know, whether that's just being able to find figure out what we have, or also just like, here's a PDF of the transcript, here's the audio, here's the video clips. So we're working on that too. But I'm jealous of all your online stuff that you've got going to, Lisa. That sounds really great.
Thank you. I mean, one other thing that I really wanted to point out is that, you know, we're living through history right now, so that, you know, while we're looking at the voices of the past, we also, it's very important, I mean, I'm sure for both of our organizations to get the voices of today, because they are the history of tomorrow. And, you know, it's sometimes tough. I mean, sometimes people don't realize that they are, you know, really making we make history every day, all of us. And sometimes people are not realizing, like, just in the way, for example, that in the Jewish world, that bar and bar mitzvahs have had to been celebrated. I mean, there's some drive-through bar and bar mitzvahs. There's talk of like canceling the bar mitzvah, but, you know, the bar mitzvah happens when the child turns, you know, 13, regardless of, you know, the fact that we're in COVID times and we can't still have a party. I mean, the bar and bar mitzvah still happens. And so we are here to capture, you know, Jewish weddings and bar mitzvahs, and, you know, how we celebrated Passover was so unique.
Right. How many Zoom Seders were there?
Yeah, exactly. I know. So, you know, so it's really, I mean, our work as oral historians and in the history world is sort of endless, because a lot of history just happened while we were talking, and we need to, you know, get on that. So anyway, we created something called our Haggadah Stories, and it lives in our digital museum. So Haggadah means to tell, and it's generally associated with Passover, the telling of the Passover story. But these Haggadah stories are in the time of coronavirus, and we have a lot of different groups. We have medical workers, educators, and we're continuing to collect those stories through hearing their voice.
Yeah, that's great.
That's great.
And just to add on that a little bit, here at the Nordic Museum, we have about 750 oral histories for our Nordic American Voices program. But of course, due to COVID, for health reasons, we've had to put those on hold. But in that you know, in this kind of strange time, we've been collecting stories specifically related to COVID. And so we've gotten about 18 interviews now with people in both the Pacific Northwest, as well as all 5 Nordic countries, just, you know, getting the perspective on what it's been like over there, over here. It's pretty different, obviously. So it's been really great to collect those stories. And, you know, I encourage other organizations to really capitalize on this time and make sure that they're archiving as much as possible. So. And kind of along the same lines, you know, because everything's kind of getting virtualized now in many museums and cultural organizations, that might be one way that the programs are changing and evolving. But do you see other ways in the future for how oral history programs might start to change? And Mikala, would you like to start? Oh, I think Mikala's frozen.
I was gonna, yeah, so one of the things is like Zoom interviews and, you know, video interviews, you know, like you guys were collecting stories about the COVID experience in the APA community. And we started out, right when things shut down, I was with and they conducted a whole bunch of interviews with people in the Chinatown and surrounding communities to document their COVID experience. And it was the first time I had ever thought we would do, you know, video interviews online, but it turned out to work pretty well. And immediacy of actual being in a room together, but it worked reasonably well. People were able to create that rapport, and Zoom will transcribe things for you, which was kind of remarkable. And so I think kind of looking at, you know, software that can actually translate and transcribe things, like I feel like there's going to be a lot of opportunity there. So I'm excited about some of that. And of course, you can Zoom interview somebody who's anywhere. Like, you know, the getting people together is sometimes the hardest part of doing an interview. And then the other things I was thinking about a little bit in response to this question are kind of like the reasons that people collect stories. And there's a lot of there's a number of organizations in the Chinatown International District who are collecting stories around COVID and them to try to preserve those things and maybe use you know, the efforts is like, we want to highlight the work we're doing as an organization. We want to like raise money for our, you know, small business relief fund by sharing stories about small business owners. And, you know, like, it's not that those stories aren't wonderful, they're great, but definitely knowing how they were collected and why they were collected is going to be an important thing as we, you know, as people want to use those in the future to kind of
Mikala, you're cutting out just a little bit.
of the collecting of the story. Sorry, am I back?
Yes. Mm-hmm. I just didn't catch the very end. The very end of that. No, it's okay.
I just think it's important to look at, like, you know, the traditional oral history collection idea is like, we are going to go out and document this, you know, big long story. We don't know why anybody would ever want to use it, but we figure somebody will in the future sometime, and so we're just creating this primary source evidence for someone about something. And that's, you know, that's not necessarily objective either, but certainly stories that are collected with a particular you know, fundraising purpose or promotional purpose in mind are, you know, you need to just know that when you're using them. And I think the other thing I think is kind of the StoryCorps approach, which I, you know, StoryCorps is amazing, has really promoted the idea of oral history to people who never would have thought it was interesting at all. But they definitely focus on that relationship between the interviewer and the interviewee, and that moment of connection, and that thing that you were saying of like, oh, why didn't you tell me this before, Granddad, or whatever? Well, we didn't ever sit down in a room and with a recorder, and you didn't ask me, you know. So I think that moment is really important, and that's the thing that the folks who founded StoryCorps were really key on. And then the idea like, oh, we're going to put it all in the Library of Congress, and will you be able to find it? Like, what does it mean? What, and I think that's the part that, that the traditional oral history has really, that the sort of like 2/3 of the work happens after you've done the interview, and the part where you like actually make sure it is documented and accessible and you have permission to share it, and all of that stuff, and you've linked it to all the other pieces of information you have and the photos and everything. Like that part, I think like that's the part we kind of need to stand up for. And I think that is certainly the part that serves genealogy research best. So I hope that we can kind of hang on to that even as all this wonderful storytelling and story collecting is burgeoning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Lisa, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I mean, for us, basically, I think I said in the beginning that we formed a new committee, the Hero Washington Committee, called we know as the How Committee, and just changing the platform. And obviously, not only due to COVID, but because of COVID, it has happened much quicker. And we're working through protocol now, doing our first interviews on Zoom. And, I did a bunch of interviews myself for testing over the summer with some of our donors, and was what Mikala was saying. It was for a very specific purpose. I mean, I asked them very pointed questions about why save history, and I obviously wanted certain answers. So it really, I think what it made me think about is that the interviewer training for the interviewers is very important. And in some of our past interviews, we have some great material, but there was a lot of, because one, I said it was chronologically based and biographically based. And so if the person wanted to speak about something that was important to them, there was like a, like a regiment. Yeah. They had to go, the interviewer felt like I had to get through from birth to, and it wasn't giving the individual the real authorship. And I learned a lot from a recent oral history program put on by Columbia University, actually, about the author being the interviewee, and so author your own story. So if the interviewer has an agenda in mind, try to let that loose. I mean, if that's fine, if that's the point of it, and I think Mikala brought that up quite a bit. But I really want to make sure that we hear from the people in their own words as well. So that's really important to me as we develop and we move forward with this new program. And one other thing is that there's been a great influx of Jewish people to Washington State. And so a lot of, the newcomers are not as connected in terms of, that past history. They didn't go to school here. Their parents aren't from here. The businesses weren't here. But yet they came into the state, and why should they be connected to the Washington State Jewish Historical Society and, tell their story? Why? Because they're bringing their own pasts to our state, and they're part of our history now. And so I really, really feel that we need to reach out to other groups, young people, tech workers. I mean, there's many, many groups that we, our work is endless. So, it's just something that we think about, and we're working hard to make sure that we can broach that, area. So
yeah, that's definitely the case for us as well, with lots of new immigrants trying to feel like we can make them feel connected to this place too. Yeah. And I really love what you said about the narrator being the author of the interview. That really well said. That's exactly what I was trying to get at. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you brought that up, so thank you.
Yeah, I agree. It's really important, and it is interesting to go back and listen to some interviews that maybe were conducted 30 years ago, and the person wasn't as trained, and then you're like, why stop interrupting them? Just let them tell their stories. But yeah, it's frustrating.
It's very frustrating. I mean, I want to say, like, sometimes I look up in our collection and I say, and I'm like, I wonder what the people thought about, such and such historical topic. or like they lived through, you know, all kinds of things. And why do I not have that material? You know, and so I feel like it's our job to make sure that that material like is from now going forward, and even, you know, trying to go back in specific topical interviews and relevant issues, like what did you think during this war or that war, or this gas crisis, or the refuseniks, Soviet Jews coming, you know, to our state and country. I mean, there's a lot of material that I feel like we need to do. So again, endless work for historians.
And I think, you know, the training, interviewing really is a skill, and it takes practice. And I think people don't always understand that. And, you know, part of it is about like giving space for the person to share what they want to share with, but part of it also sometimes is about like convincing them that what they have to share is really important and you want to hear it, you know, and they think like, oh, whatever, I'm just an ordinary person, I don't, you know, and, you know, my life hasn't been that interesting. And you're like, no, like really, like you lived through something unique and your take on it is unique, and we really want to get that and hear that, and we want future generations to be able to understand that. And like, so I think that yeah, I do feel like really getting the idea out there that like interviewing is something that takes practice and time and skill and art, and should be respected as a thing.
Definitely respected.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time. Alison
Yeah.
will have her hands full after this. But one thing I wanted to also bring up is that we did a sort of test pilot program with the Jewish Women's Archives this past summer, and we worked in collaboration with Jewish Women's Archives, which is a wonderful group based out of Brookline, Massachusetts, and they have even written some material on, you know, oral histories and how to do them. And they have hundreds of oral histories themselves with prominent Jewish women and many all over the world. But they had developed an app on the phone that you could use to just record your voice, you know, and it was just like, not that we can't do that anyway, because we could press our voice memos and record people. It was interesting that this test pilot happened during COVID, because I feel like it might have been a little more successful if I was able to go with my phone to events that I would have been at to record people and ask them questions. I mean, not having that, we basically put out a list, you know, of questions, and I approached like so many women that I thought were all doing great things in the state. So many Jewish women that had done great things, doing great things. I wanted to hear, I thought they were agents of change, and they didn't think of themselves in that way. And they wouldn't actually get, you know, they would be more willing to interview someone else or give someone else's story, whether it be a family member or, you know, someone in the community, than tell about their own, you know, role in doing this. And
Do you think that was a gender thing?
what? I'm sorry.
Do you think that's partly a gender thing?
You know, that is a good question. I thought about that. And it is possible that it is a gender thing. That women, you know, think that what they're doing is what you said, either ordinary, or it's just like, you know, something that they are just meant to do, and they don't think of it as extraordinary. And even women as advocates in their own family for you know, a kid with special needs, or for helping an elderly person, I felt like was deserving of recognition and, you know, should be documented. But they didn't feel that way themselves. So it could be Mikala. And we'll come back with a different approach to that. So I will get more of those stories one way or another. But it's, you know, it's good to test pilot different ways to do things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Definitely. Great. So what do you hope that people take away from oral history programs like these, whether they're a participant or they're listening to a story? What's your hope for what this all means, I guess? And, Lisa, would you like to start?
Sure. I mean, obviously, like, history repeats itself. That's the common, you know, saying. And then, you know, there's just so much energy and perseverance and passion to have put into the formation of the Jewish organizations here in the state. And, you know, I think also that the work ethic in working, like, you know, 7 days a week. I mean, sometimes even on Jewish holidays, there were some in the stories, and can be told to our young people, to other, you know, to other immigrant groups, and how, you know, how we have done things, and how, you know, I mean, there's a lot of overlap. You know, I think it's just basically just understanding the strength and the attitudes that, and the service that people put in. And I think it's really great for the young people and all researchers. And, you know, it's good to keep this going. So yeah, that's.
Yeah, definitely. How about you, Mikala? What's your hope?
Yes, all of that, I think. And I think really wanting people to get the idea that, like, their story matters, that, you know, that it's not only about famous people or, you know, great achievers or whatever, that these ordinary stories of the lives of immigrants and their descendants and, you know, people making it in America, you know, these are really important stories for everyone. And like you said, we can make these connections between shared and similar and different experiences and kind of help us all come together. And I think the other thing I wanted to mention is the intergenerational connections can be incredibly powerful, that there's not enough opportunities in the world today for young people and old people and middle-aged people to really connect across those boundaries and listen to each other. And, you know, I think that, you know, getting young people to listen to old people is often in many cultures, and that's something that can be really powerful for elders to be able to share their stories with younger people. But I think it's also really important for older people to listen to young people, and that can happen too in that kind of special kind of conversation that is created in an oral history, and that mutual understanding can really transform the community. And that's one of the things that we really want to do with our work. I also wanted to say, I was thinking when you were talking about trying to get at different ways to collect stories for people who may not think that their ordinary existence matters or whatever, it was some of the projects that I've seen with youth, and we've done a little bit of this, is like doing photo diaries and then sharing stories around the photos. That the photography and online photography is such a medium that people are really into now, and is like really the way people, young people in particular, that I think it would be interesting to explore using that as a way to trigger stories for people. You know, sending young people out to just like take 10 photos today, and, you know, like tell me what your COVID life was like. You know, that has been something that we might consider. I don't know if that's you can edit this out if it doesn't fit into the stream of the conversation, but that was a thought that I had when you were talking, Lisa.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think, oh, go ahead, Alison.
Oh, I was just going to say with the photos, I mean, that could even be like a publication or something too. I mean, that's something that I've seen, and people are really interested in that from the visual and storytelling aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we've just started, and we only have a couple of teens, but we hope to grow our teen historian program, where and I've been on a couple of the interviews that one of our teens did in particular, and the best way that they got a lot of information was through looking at some photos and talking to them about their their experiences. And it lit up the teen and it lit up the senior, and it was a very special bonding relationship. And so I really am hoping to continue this program, actually, and be able to provide some more training to the young people. So I might invite you, either one of you, on to be a trainer.
Sure, happy to, anytime.
Yeah.
And I think that is also another thing I think I want people that take away from our program is, like we were talking about, interviewing as a skill, and it's a skill that we want to strengthen and share and build more capacity in the community for that kind of listening and that kind of documenting of stories and history.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And kind of along those same lines, talking about community and collaboration, do you envision any way that our 3 organizations plus other organizations in the area who conduct oral histories could collaborate in some way, sharing stories? Like, we all represent cultural organizations and sort of a cultural exchange perhaps, or do you have any thoughts on that, either of you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of ways we could collaborate. I think I know I keep saying, like, we're working on our online presence, and it seems like you guys have made more progress in some of those areas than we have, and it would be great to share resources about how to share things online, either as, like, archives or as interpreted, curated collections of things. I think doing oral history workshops would be, I love to do them, and I'm happy to do them with anyone. And it seems like maybe focusing them in our case on immigrant stories or stories around traumatic experiences, or like however we might want to like focus that, so that people can look at the histories of more marginalized communities and think about what the particulars are of interviewing those kinds of folks. And I'm totally open to any other ideas about collaborating. I think that's how we can really strengthen and support each other if we work together on the things we care about, which we all care about these great things.
Yeah, no, there's actually a lot that we can work on, and a lot of it has to do with the training and the education. Looking at some of what you've done and some tremendous work with young people. The other thing is that I'd love to learn more about, and the Wing Luke is famous for their community-based projects, and I'd love to be able to empower other groups to be able to, do some of this work, so it doesn't just come from the 2.5 employees that we have. So that is something that I'd really like to actually sit down by Zoom or whatever with you and or others to talk about a little bit more. I've been long thought about it, but it now makes total sense even more. We have so many groups out there as well. I'd like to be very inclusive, of course. And then the other thing is that there's a lot of even overlaps with our own stories between, Alison, we've sponsored and worked with you with the Nordic on the Wallenberg dinner, the story of Raoul Wallenberg, and every year you have a tremendous speaker for that event, and it is an overlap with Jewish history. And Mikala, there's plenty of overlaps I can think of offhand, whether it be Jews coming through Shanghai, or the other thing is that I know tons of people who have adopted, from, China or elsewhere, and have stories of trying to, a close friend of mine, bringing their child up in both with Jewish values and her Chinese heritage as well. So it's very interesting. And I long thought about that kind of collaboration.
I'm trying to remember, there is some Chinese American rabbi, a woman rabbi, that we featured in some exhibit a while back. Yeah, no, there's always these intersections where you're like,
yeah.
But yeah, definitely. There's all kinds of people out there, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I know what you mean, but I can't remember the name.
Yeah.
I would like to see that one. Actually, that one was brought up recently. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I think we're getting close to an hour. So would you like to share some final thoughts, Lisa? Anything that you'd like to share before we close out on your program, or any favorite thing about oral history in general? Or
in general, I think oral history is phenomenal. I think that, a lot of our collection is about oral history, and now that we have the capability with technology to do, video history is important. We kind of alluded to that, but through the Zoom approach. But because one thing I'm always surprised about in our oral history collection is that we don't have photo, like for every person that had an oral history, we don't necessarily have the corresponding photos in the photographic collection. So it's kind of one of my goals to make sure that we see who the person is. I mean, if there's a way to hear their voice and see their picture and hear their story together, that's, I guess, what our digital museum is about. But to make sure that we gather some of these resources together as we're doing these oral histories, I think is kind of critical. And my last thought is the always fun topic that I love is the fundraising aspect, and that, it's not free. And it takes resources. And I mean, as oral historians ourselves and people that are passionate about our field and our work, we tend to give all to this. I had one of my donors recently say, it's not free. And I like that saying. I mean, it takes archivists and historians and, editors and, all kinds of people to do our work. And I think that's the hardest part. People don't realize, just do a little recording, and there is a big process to this that we're working through and we're all a part of. And the resources and whether they can be maybe some shared, fundraising together I'd definitely be willing to explore, like on a bigger basis in the community.
Mikala, do you have any final thoughts?
I think I've said a lot of the things.
Yeah.
I think oral history to me, one of the things that I think is really powerful about it is it's a way to kind of unearth stories that didn't get told or didn't get recorded or didn't get into the history books or whatever. And so for people from marginalized communities, it can be this incredibly empowering tool to really get their stories into the public eye. And we talked a little bit about, our exhibits are focused both on kind of insiders who are in the community that the exhibit's about, but also the general public. And hearing people's first person stories is a way to really, I think it strips away kind of the ideological political stuff, like you're not going to argue about immigration policy. You're listening to someone's actual story, their experience that they had immigrating. Like that's not something you can argue about. It's something you can listen to and learn from. And I think that is really helps people develop compassion and empathy for each other, which I think we need a lot now.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to thank you both. This has been so wonderful. I just really appreciate hearing your insights and your obvious passion for this topic. It's been really wonderful. And so on behalf of the National Nordic Museum, I'd like to thank you for being a part of this today.
Thank you. It's been wonderful. I really enjoyed the conversation and I'm looking forward to more.
Great.
Thank you as well, Alison, and great to see you, Mikala, and share this time with you. And, hopefully we can do some of that collaboration in the future.
Yes, please.
Yeah, that'd be great.
To that. So, thank you.
Thank you.